Hi, Assalamualaikum. How's everyone today? Are you guys feeling okay? Are you guys in a good condition? I hope you guys are doing well today. Okay, so my name is Aida Sofea Binti Haris and my metric number is I191037110. So today in subject MGT6093 Project Management, my group will present chapter 5, which is the topic is Project Scope Management. So my teammate is, the first one is me, Aida Sofea Binti Haris, and the second one is Fasya Atiqah binti Asri, and the third one is Siti Khatijah binti Yusof. So I hope you guys pay attention to what we will present today, because at the end of the presentation we will ask a question to you guys, okay? So, this is the subtopic that we will present for today. The first one is Plan Scope Management, and the second one is Collect Requirements. Okay, the next one is Define Scope, Create Wbs, Validate Scope, Control Scope, and the last one is Conclusion. Before we go any deeper, we need to know the meaning of Project Scope Management. So, what is Project Scope Management? Okay, Project Scope Management is the process required to ensure that the project includes all the work required and only the work required to complete the project successfully. Okay, in details, Project Scope Management is a process that helps in determining and documenting the list of all the project goals, tasks, deliverables, deadlines, and budget as a part of the planning process. Okay? The first one is we need to know what is the definition of Plan Scope Management. Okay, the definition of Plan Scope Management is the process of creating a scope management plan that documents how the project scope will be defined, validated, and controlled. Okay, the key benefit of this process is that it provides guidance and direction on how scope will be managed throughout the project. Okay, so if you can see the flow at the below, it includes inputs, tools and techniques, and the outputs. In the other words, Plan Scope Management makes easier to the project managers and supervisor to allocate the right amount of work necessary to successfully complete a project and controlling what is and what is not part of the project scope. The first one is inputs. There are 4 inputs in Plan Scope Management. The first one is Project Management Plan. The second one is Project Charter. The third one is Enterprise Environmental Factors. The fourth one is Organizational Process Assets. So the first one is Quality Management Plan. Okay, it is managing the project and product scope can be primarily influenced by how the organization's quality policy, methodologies, and standards are implemented on the project. The second one is Project Life Cycle Descriptions. It is the process that describes the stage that the project has gone through, starting from the initiation stage to the project closure stage. And the third one is Development Approach. The development approach is defines and determines whether or not the project manager will implement a waterfall, iterative, adaptive, agile, or hybrid development approach. The second one is Project Charter. Okay, the Project Charter defines the statement of objectives in a project. For example, like setting project goals, roles and responsibilities, and identifying stakeholder is used to provide the project framework required to plan the scope management process. Okay, so the Project Charter provides the high-level project descriptions and product characteristics from the project statement of work. So the next one, I will explain about enterprise environmental factors. Okay, so the first one in enterprise environmental factors is organization's culture. Okay, so many times the outcome of the project can be judged based on organization culture. For example, if the organization is functioning under a productive work culture, then the project has a high chance of achieving the desired objective with the implementations of explicit scope management. So the second one is infrastructure. Okay, so infrastructure plays an essential role in defining the success of implementing a scope management plan for a project. The reason being that the existing facilities and the equipment used in the organization have to be of high standards to meet the expectation defined in the project management plan by the stakeholder. And the third one is personnel administrations. Okay, based on the policies and administrative guidelines that exist in the organization, the project manager can define the performance of the scope management plan. Okay, for example, when the company has proper staffing and retention policies to retain those well qualified and trained employees who have experience in executing, monitoring, and closing a project, it is bound to realize the importance and utilize the scope management plan to its highest capabilities. Okay, so likewise, if it has personnel who are inexperienced or not well trained, then it will seriously take a toll on the performance of a project. And the last one for enterprise environmental factors is marketplace condition. Okay, the concept of marketplace condition is also a vital aspect that defines the scope management plans, as it allows the project manager to know his competitors in the market, the market growth rate, and also the intensity of competitiveness that exists in the current market. Okay, only when all these are taken into considerations can the project manager define and execute an effective scope management plan. Okay, and the last inputs for plan scope management is organizational process asset. And the organizational process asset are categorized into two types, namely, the first one is policies and procedure, and the second one is historical informations and lesson learned knowledge base. Okay, for the procedure is include initiations, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. And for the historical information and lesson learned knowledge base, it provides information on the project records and documents, project closure information, and it also showcase the project selection process and project performance witness during the previous project. So we will be more better than the previous project. Okay, for tools and techniques, we have two tools and techniques, which is expert judgment and meetings. Okay, for expert judgment, it refers to input received from knowledge and experienced parties. Okay, expertise may be provided by any groups or person with specialized education, knowledge, skill, experience, or training in developing scope management plans. For the meetings, project teams may attend project meetings to develop the scope management plan. Attendees at these meetings may include the project manager, the project sponsor, selected project team members, selected stakeholder, anyone with responsibility for any of the scope management process, and others are needed when we use this technique of meetings. Okay, so what is the output inputs of the scope management plan. Okay, so we can get the process to prepare a detailed project scope statement, and the second one is the process that allows creating WBS from the detailed project scope statement. Okay, the WBS will be explained by my friend later. Okay, so the third one is the process that establish how the WBS will be maintained and approved, and the fourth one is the process that explains how formal acceptance of complete project deliverables are to be obtained, and the last one is the process to control the request for change of the detailed project scope statement will be documented. Okay, so the scope management plan can be formal or informal, broadly framed or highly detailed based on the needs of the project. So the next one, we also get an outputs of requirements management plan. Okay, the requirement management plan is a component of the project management plan that describe how requirements will be analyzed, documented, and managed. Okay, as we can see in the slide, in the requirements management plan, we need to know how the requirement activities are planned, tracked and reported, how the change of the product will be initiated, the procedures required for analyzing the impact and method used to trace and report the issues, and the fourth one is getting details of the authorizations levels that are required to approve the change made, the condition required to rank the implemented process, and focusing on why and how the product metrics are being used, and the last one is traceability structure to reflect which requirement features will be captured on the traceability metric. Okay, so the next one, I will explain to you guys how to collect the requirements. Okay, the first one, we need to know the definition of the collect requirements. Okay, the definition of this is the process of determining, documenting, and managing stakeholder needs and requirements to meet project objective. Okay, so the key benefit of this process is that it provides the basis for defining and managing the project scope, including product scope. Okay, so the inputs, tools, and technique and outputs of the this process you can see in the table. It got inputs like scope management plan and so on, and tools and technique like interview, focus group, and the last one is outputs. So it will have the outcome like requirements documentation, requirements traceability metric. So I will explain about the input first. Before we go to inputs collect requirements, I will let you guys know the classifications of requirements. So the first one is business requirements. Okay, business requirements describe the higher level needs of the organization as a whole, such as the business issues or opportunities and reason why a project has been undertaken. Okay, for the second one is stakeholder requirements. It describes needs of a stakeholder or a stakeholder group. Okay, so the third one is solution requirements. Okay, solution requirements describe features, functions, and characteristics of the product, service, or result that will meet the business stakeholder requirements. Okay, so in solution requirements, actually it grouped into two group, which is functional and non-functional requirement. For the functional requirements, it describes the behavior of the product. For example, like process, data, and interactions with the product. For the non-functional requirements, it like supplement functional requirements and describe the environmental condition or qualities required for the product to be effective. For example, like reliability, performance, level of service, safety, like that. So the difference between the functional requirement and the non-functional requirement is like the functional requirement is all about process, and the non-functional requirement is about the performance, the outcome. Okay, so the next one is transitions requirements. It describes temporary capabilities, for example like data conversions and training requirements needed to transition from the current as is state to the future to be state. Okay, so the next one is project requirements. It describes the action, process or other condition the project needs to meet. And the last one is quality requirement. So the quality requirements capture any condition or criteria needed to validate the successful completions of a project, deliverable or fulfillment of other project requirements. Okay, as we can see in the slide, the inputs of the collect requirements. Okay, the first one is the basic one lah, which is the scope management plan. Okay, so the scope management plan provides clarity as to how project teams will determine which type of requirements need to be collected for the project. The second one is requirement management plan. Okay, the requirement management plan provide the process that will be used throughout the collect requirements process to define and document the stakeholder needs. Okay, so the third one is stakeholder management plan. Okay, the stakeholder management plan is used to understand stakeholder communications requirements and the level of stakeholder engagement in order to assess and adapt to the level of stakeholder participations in requirements activities. Okay, so the fourth one is like the basic one also, the project charter. The project charter is used to provide the high level descriptions of the product, service or result of the project so that the detailed requirements can be developed. Okay, so the last one is stakeholder register. The stakeholder register is used to identify stakeholder who can provide information on the requirements. Okay, so the stakeholder register also captures major requirements and main expectations stakeholder may have for the project. So next, we will move to tools and technique of collect requirements. The first one is interview. Okay, so interview, it can be done through a meeting, through a phone call or through emails. And in this collect requirements technique, project manager can interview the stakeholder to get their requirements, and there can be a checklist, a list of questions, or the manager can just ask the stakeholder to express their expectation from the project in a free form. Okay, so project manager can take note and stores the requirements received from the project stakeholder. The second technique of the collect requirements is focus group. Okay, this technique is used to get a specific set of stakeholder requirements. Okay, for example, we can organize a meeting with executive directors in the company to get their requirement first, and then organize a separate meeting with the functional manager to get their requirement also. And the third one is the technique of collect requirement is facilitated workshops. Okay, in this technique, stakeholder with a different perspective are brought together. Okay, for example, I give the example, if we manage a software project. Okay, so we can bring the software developers, and then we can bring the test engineers and operation team and the customer all together. So each group of project stakeholder will look to the project from their perspective and express their requirements. For example, operation team will consider operational aspect, and the customer will express their business requirements, and the software developers will state the technical requirements, like that. Okay, so for the first one of group creativity technique is brainstorming. Okay, brainstorming actually it is used to generate and collect multiple ideas related to project and product requirements. Okay, actually this brainstorming is a group thing. It's a group thing because several people come together to list requirements of a project, and during the meeting, new ideas are generated from existing ideas, and it helps to identify new requirements. Okay, next is a nominal group technique. Okay, this technique is actually a collect requirements process technique to prioritize ideas rather than generating new requirements. Okay, in nominal group technique, meeting participants rank the most successful ideas. Okay, this helps to focus on more valuable or prioritize ideas first in generating project requirements. Okay, so the nominal group technique is usually used in brainstorming meetings because there will be several ideas coming from several stakeholders. Okay, the next one is idea or mind mapping technique. Okay, so this collect requirements process technique is actually a diagram of ideas or notes to help generate, classify or record informations. Ideas or parts of a project are drawn on the table, and new ideas or parts can be in the project are generated. Okay, for example, like airplane. Okay, an airplane will consist of parts such as wings, such as cockpit area, and tail, and passenger cabin. And when thinking about what can be in the passenger area, we can list the toilets, the seats, the serving kitchen, and so on. For the next technique is technique of affinity diagrams. Okay, so in this technique, ideas generated from any other requirements gathering techniques are sorted into groups by similarities. Okay, for example, like the airplane I said before, so the requirements for cockpit area, requirements about passenger area, and requirements about tails can be grouped because it can be sorted into groups by similarities. This technique actually helps to see additional scopes or risks because similar requirements will be seen together under the same group, which will ease to see if there will be any more requirements or if there are any further risks regarding a group of requirements. Okay, so for the next technique is group decision making techniques. It is actually an assessment process having multiple alternatives with an expected outcome in the form of future actions. Okay, this technique can be used to generate, classify and prioritize product requirements. Okay, there are various methods of reaching a group decision. Okay, such as the first one is unanimity. Okay, unanimity is a decisions that is reached whereby everyone agrees on a single course of action. Okay, so it means in one group everybody agrees about that one thing, like that. Okay, so the next one is majority. Okay, majority is a decisions that is reached with support obtained from more than 50% of the members of the group. Okay, having a group size with an uneven number of participants can ensure that a decision will be reached rather than resulting in a tie. Okay, and the third one is plurality. Okay, in plurality, a decision that is reached whereby the largest block in a group decide even if a majority is not achieved. Okay, this method is generally used when the number of options nominated is more than 2. This it means that it have a lot of no. Say no. This plurality have a lot of no. Okay. So the next one is, and the last one is dictatorships. Okay. In this method, only one individuals make the decision for the group. Means it will not asking for the other opinion. It just this one person can make decisions for the whole group. Okay, the next one is the technique of questionnaires and survey. Okay, so this technique is used for large groups where there are several stakeholders that we have to collect their requirements. Okay, so for example, if we have more than 200 stakeholders in a project that we need to contact and collect their requirements, organizing a meeting or interviewing one by one will be take a long time to finalize the requirement. So for the simple way, we can prepare a questionnaire and survey and just collect their requirements of several stakeholders. Using this technique will be easier for the company. Okay, the next one is observations. Okay, this technique, we will watch or we will observe a potential user of the product to identify the requirements. Okay, for example, in order to determine the user experience or most used features of an e-commerce shopping website, a consumer can be observed. Okay, based on the step that the consumer will take, project requirements can be identified or prioritized. And the next technique is prototype. Okay, in this technique, a model of the proposed product is developed, and then this model is presented to stakeholders for feedback. Okay, for example, like a smartphone manufacturer will produce a new smartphone. So in order to get feedback from stakeholders, features and functionalities from existing smartphone can be combined in a prototype, and this prototype can be presented to a set of consumers to get their feedback. Okay, the next technique is benchmarking. Okay, benchmarking is actually a company compares its actual or planned practice to those of comparable organizations to identify best practice. Okay, in a simple example, for example, Samsung benchmark its test processes with the Apple. This is an example of benchmarking because they are both in the smartphone and tablet market, and they are competitors. So if you want to be an organizational that profitable, you need to know the market dynamics, the competitors in the market, its strengths and weaknesses against competitors. The next one is context diagram. Okay, this technique, okay, it actually give an example of a scope model. Okay, this context diagram will visualize how a system, function or product will work. Okay, by this way, scope becomes more understandable because we can see the process. Okay, so context diagram define how other users and system interact with it. So context diagrams show steps that consumer need to do, step that will be done by the process, action that will be complete by the product, outputs of the system, and so on. Okay, the last one is in tools and technique collect requirement is document analysis. Okay, so this technique is existing documents are used to get requirements for the project. Okay, for example, I give the Apple, okay, smartphone Apple. Okay, Apple will produce a new smartphone version. Okay, existing documents of older smartphone version will be a basis for generating requirements for the new smartphone. Therefore, business plans, agreements, requests for proposal, application software documentations, use cases, and many more documents can be the source of generating requirements if we are using document analysis technique. So we will know how previous requirements we get like that. So for the outputs of collect requirements, the first one, we will get requirements documentations, and the second one is requirements traceability matrix. Okay, so for the requirements documentation, it describes how individual requirements meet the business need for the project. Okay, requirements may start out a high level and become progressively more detailed as more about the requirements is known. Okay, before being baseline, requirement need to be unambiguous, which means measurable and testable, and traceable, complete, consistent and acceptable to key stakeholder. Okay, the format of a requirements document may range from a simple document listing all the requirements categorized by stakeholder and priority to more elaborate forms containing an executive summary, detailed descriptions and attachments. Okay, for the second one is requirements traceability matrix. Okay, so the requirements traceability matrix is a grid that links product requirements from their origin to the deliverables that satisfy them. Okay, the implementations of a requirements matrix helps ensure that each requirement adds business value by linking it to the business and project objective. It provides a means to track requirements throughout the project life cycle, helping to ensure the requirements approved in the requirements documentations are delivered at the end of the project. Finally, it provides a structure for managing change to the product scope. As you can see in the slide, there is the example of requirements traceability matrix with its associated attributes. Okay, so attribute associated with each requirement can be recorded in the requirement traceability matrix. Okay, these attributes helps to define key information about the requirement. Okay, for example, like it may include a unique identifier, textual descriptions of the requirement, owner, source, priority, version and so on. So in short, collect requirements is an important process because if the requirements from the stakeholder are not collected properly, the scope of the project may risk being faulty. Okay, so suitable techniques to collect requirements should be selected and implemented by the project manager in order to have a successful scope management. Okay, so for the next slide, I will pass to my friend Siti Khatijah to continue the presentation. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Siti Khatijah binti Yusof. My matrix number is I1910379. And for today, I will be presenting about define scope and create Wbs. Okay, first of all, I will talk about define scope. Okay, what is define scope? Define scope is the process of developing a detailed description of the project and product. The key benefit of this process is that it describes the project, service or result boundaries by defining which of the requirements collected will be included in and excluded from the project scope. Okay, as you guys can see down below, there are inputs, tools and techniques and also outputs. So in inputs of defined scope, there are scope management plan, there are project charter, there are requirements documentation and also organizational process assets. Okay, in tools and techniques of defined scope, there are expert judgment, product analysis, of alternatives generation and also facilitated workshops. Okay, so outputs, there are two, which is project scope statement and also project documents update. Okay, since all of the requirements identified in collect requirements may not be included in the project, the define scope process selects the final project requirements from the requirements documentation delivered during the collect requirements process. It then develops a detailed description of the project and product, service or result. The preparation of a detailed project scope statement is critical to project success and builds upon the major deliverables, assumptions, and constraints that are documented during project initiation. During project planning, the project scope is defined and described with greater specificity as more information about the project is known. Existing risks, assumptions, and constraints are analyzed for completeness and added or updated as necessary. The defined scope process can be highly iterative. In iterative lifecycle projects, a high-level vision will be developed for the overall project, but the detailed scope is determined one iteration at a time, and the detailed planning for the next iteration is carried out as work progresses on the current project scope and deliverables. So we can go through the inputs of defined scope. As I said before, there are four main things in inputs of defined scope. There are scope management plan, project charter, requirement documentation, and also organizational process assets. Okay, in scope management plan, the scope management plan is a component of the project's management plan that establishes the activities for developing, monitoring, and controlling the project scope. Okay, in project charter, the project charter provides the high-level project description and product characteristics. It also contains project approval requirements. If a project charter is not used in the performing organization, the comparable information needs to be acquired or developed and used as a basis for the detailed project scope statement. Organizations that do not produce a formal project charter will usually perform an informal analysis to identify the content necessary for further scope planning. Okay. Next is requirements documentation. The things that you need to understand is this documentation will be used to select the requirements that will be included in the project. Okay, next is organizational process assets. Organizational process assets can influence how scope is defined. Examples include, but are not limited to, policies, procedures, and templates for a project scope statement, project files from previous projects, and also lessons learned from previous phases of project. Okay, so next is tools and techniques of defined scope. In tools and techniques of defined scope, there are expert judgment, there are product analysis, there are alternatives generation, and also facilitated workshops. Okay, first is expert judgment. Expert judgment is often used to analyze the information needed to develop the project scope statement. Such judgment and expertise is applied to any technical detail. Such expertise is provided by any group or individual with specialized knowledge or training and is available from many sources, including but not limited to other units within the organization, consultants, stakeholders including customers or sponsors, professional and technical associations, industry groups, and lastly, subject matter experts. These are the things that including but not limited to. Okay, but not limited to expert judgment. Okay, next is product analysis. For projects that have a product as a deliverable as opposed to a service or result, product analysis can be an effective tool. Okay, each application area has one or more generally accepted methods for translating high-level product descriptions into tangible deliverables. Product analysis includes techniques such as product breakdown, system analysis, requirements analysis, system engineering, value engineering, and value analysis. Okay, next is alternative generation. Okay, alternative generation is a technique used to develop as many potential options as possible in order to identify different approaches to execute and perform the work of the project. A variety of general management techniques can be used, such as brainstorming, lateral thinking, analysis of alternatives, and so many more others. Okay, lastly is facilitated workshops. Okay, there are the facilitated workshop, the participation of key players with a variety of expectations and or fields of expertise in these intensive working sessions help to reach a cross-functional and common understanding of the project objectives and its limits. Okay, lastly in defined scope is outputs. Okay, outputs in defined scope, there are project scope statement and also project documents updates. Okay, first of all, I will talk about project scope statement. Okay, the project scope statement is the description of the project scope, major deliverables, assumptions and constraints. The project scope statement documents the entire scope, including project and product scope. It describes in detail the project's deliverables and the work required to create those deliverables. It also provides a common understanding of the project scope among project stakeholders. It may contain explicit scope exclusions that can assist in managing stakeholder expectations. Okay, it enables the project team to perform more detailed planning, guides the project team's work during execution, and provides the baseline for evaluating whether requests or changes or additional work are contained within or outside the project's boundaries. Okay, the degree and level of detail to which the project scope statement defines the work that will be performed and the work that is excluded can help determine how well the project management team can control the overall project scope. The detailed project scope statement, either directly or by reference to other documents, includes the following. Okay, first is product scope description. Okay, second is acceptance criteria. Third is deliverable, and fourth is project exclusion, and lastly and fifth is constraints, and lastly is assumptions. Okay, what is product scope description? Progressively elaborates the characteristics of the product, service or result described in the project charter and requirements documentation. Okay, in acceptance criteria is a set of conditions that is required to be met before deliverables are accepted. Okay, in deliverable, any unique and verifiable product, result or capability to perform a service that is required to be produced to complete a process, phase or project. Deliverables also include ancillary results such as project management reports and documentation. These deliverables may be described at a summary level or in great detail. Okay, in project exclusions, generally identifies what is excluded from the project. Explicitly stating what is out of scope for the project helps to manage stakeholders' expectations. In constraints, a limiting factor that affects the execution of a project or process. Okay, constraints identified with the project scope statement list and describe the specific internal or external restrictions or limitations associated with the project scope that affect the execution of the project. For example, a predefined budget or any imposed data or any imposed dates or scheduled milestones that are issued by the customer or performing organization. Okay. When a project is performed under an agreement, contractual provisions will generally be constraints. Information on constraints may be listed in the project scope statement or in a separate log. Okay, lastly is assumptions. Assumption is a factor in the planning process that is considered to be true, real, or certain without proof or demonstration. Also describes the potential impact of those factors if they prove to be false. Project teams frequently identify, document, and validate assumptions as part of their planning process. Information on assumptions may be listed in the project scope statement in a separate log. Although the project charter and the project scope statement are sometimes perceived as containing a certain degree of redundancy, they are different in the level of detail contained in each. The project charter contains high-level information, while the project scope statement contains a detailed description of the scope elements. These elements are progressively elaborated throughout the project. Okay, next thing that I will presenting is Create Wbs. Okay, what you need to understand in Create Wbs is the process of subdiving project deliverables and project work into smaller, more manageable components. Okay, the key benefit of this process is that it provides a structured version of what has to be delivered. The input, tools and techniques and outputs of this process are depicted down below. Okay, in inputs of Create Wbs, there are 5 main things, which is scope management plan, project scope statement, requirements documentation, enterprise environmental factors, and also organizational process assets. In tools and techniques, there are 2, which is decomposition and expert judgment. Okay, in outputs, there are also 2. It is scope baseline and also project documents updates. Okay. The WBS is hierarchical decomposition of the total scope of work to be carried out by the project team to accomplish the project objectives and create the required deliverables. The WBS organizes and defines the total scope of the project and represents the work specified in the current approved project scope statement. The unplanned work is contained with the lowest level of WBS components, which are called work packages. A work package can be used to group the activities where work is scheduled and estimated, monitored and controlled. In the context of the WBS, work refers to work products or deliverables that are the result of activity and not to the activity itself. Okay, before we go any further, I want to tell you guys about WBS. WBS is work breakdown structure. Okay, next is inputs of Create Wbs. Okay, as I said before, there are scope management plan, project scope statement, requirements documentation, enterprise environmental factors, and lastly, organizational process assets. Okay, in scope management plan, the scope management plan specifies how to create the WBS from the detailed project scope statement and how the WBS will be maintained and approved. Okay, in project scope statement, the project scope statement describes the work that will be performed and the work that is excluded. It also lists and describes the specific internal or external restrictions or limitations that may affect the execution of the project. Okay, in requirements documentation, the things that you need to understand in requirements documentation is detailed requirements documentation is essential for understanding what needs to be produced as the results of the project and what needs to be done to deliver the project and its final products. Okay, in enterprise environmental factors, there are industry-specific WBS standards relevant to the nature of the project may serve as external reference sources for creation of the WBS. Okay, for example, engineering projects may reference ISO or EC 15288 on system engineering. Okay, this is only for example of the enterprise environmental factors. Okay, lastly, organizational process assets. Okay, the organizational process assets that can influence the Create Wbs process include, but are not limited to, policies, procedures, and templates for the WBS, project files from previous project, and lessons learned from previous projects. Okay, next is tools and techniques of Create Wbs. As I said before, there are 2 things, which is decomposition and expert judgment. Okay, decomposition is a technique used for dividing and subdividing the project scope and project deliverables into smaller and more manageable parts. The work package is the work defined at the lowest level of the WBS for which cost and duration can be estimated and managed. The level of decomposition is often guided by the degree of control needed to effectively manage the project. The level of detail for work packages will vary with the size and complexity of the project. Decomposition of the total project work into work packages generally involves the following activities. First is identifying and analyzing the deliverables and related work. Okay, second is structuring and organizing the WBS. Third is decomposing the upper WBS level into lower level detailed components. Fourth is developing and assigning identification codes to the WBS components. And lastly is verifying that the degree of decomposition of the deliverables is appropriate. Okay, next is expert judgment. Okay, in expert judgment is often used to analyze the information needed to decompose the project deliverables down into smaller component parts in order to create an effective WBS. Such judgment and expertise is applied to technical details of the project's scope and used to reconcile differences in opinion on how to best break down to overall scope of the project. This level of expertise is provided by any group or individual with relevant training, knowledge, or experience with similar projects or business areas. Expert judgment can also come in the form of predefined templates that provide guidance on how to effectively break down common deliverables. Such templates may be industry or discipline specific or may come from experience gained in similar projects. The project manager, in collaboration with the project team, then determines the final decomposition of the project scope into the discrete work packages that will be used to effectively manage the work of the project. Okay, a WBS structure may be created through various approaches. Some of the popular methods include the top-down approach, the use of organization-specific guidelines, and the use of WBS templates. A bottom-up approach can be used during the integration of subcomponents. The WBS structure can be represented in a number of forms such as using phases of the project life cycle as the second level of decomposition with the product and project deliverables. Okay, using major deliverables as the second level of decomposition, and incorporating subcomponents which may be developed by organizations outside the project team, such as contracted work. The seller then develops the supporting contract WBS as a part of the contracted work. And decomposition of the upper level WBS components requires subdividing the work for each of the deliverables or subcomponents into its most fundamental elements, where the WBS components represent verifiable products, services, or results. The WBS may be structured as an outline, an organizational chart, or other method that identifies a hierarchical breakdown. Verifying the correctness of the decomposition requires determining that the lower level WBS components are those that are necessary and sufficient for completion of the corresponding higher level deliverables. Different deliverables can have different levels of decomposition. To arrive at a work package, the work for some deliverables needs to be decomposed only to the next level, while others need additional levels of decomposition. As the work is decomposed to greater levels of detail, the ability to plan, manage, and control the work is enhanced. Okay. However, excessive decomposition can lead to non-productive management effort, inefficient use of resources, decreased efficiency in performing the work, and difficulty aggregating data over different levels of the WBS. Decomposition may not be possible for a deliverable or subcomponent that will be accomplished far into the future. The project management team usually waits until the deliverable of subcomponent is agreed on so the details of the WBS can be developed. This technique is sometimes referred to as rolling wave planning. Okay. The WBS represents all product and project work, including the project management work. The total of the work at the lowest level should roll up to the higher levels so that nothing is left out and no extra work is performed. This is sometimes called the 100% rules. Okay, lastly, in Create Wbs is outputs. Okay, in outputs of Create Wbs, there are scope baseline and project documents updates. Okay, in scope baseline, the scope baseline is the approved version of a scope statement, work breakdown structure, WBS, and its associated Wbs dictionary that can be changed only through formal change control procedures and is used as a basis of comparison. It is a component of the project management plan. Components of the scope baseline include project scope statement and WBS and also WBS dictionary. Okay, project scope statement includes the description of the project scope, major deliverables and assumptions, and also constraints. Okay, in WBS, work breakdown structure, the work breakdown structure is a hierarchical decomposition of the total scope of work to be carried out by the project team to be accomplish the project objectives and create the required deliverables. Each descending level of the WBS represent an increasingly detailed definition of the project work. The WBS is finalized by assigning each work package to a control account and establishing a unique identifier for that work package from a code of accounts. These identifiers provide a structure for hierarchical summation of cost, schedule, and resource information. A control account is management control point where scope, budget, actual cost, and schedule are integrated and compared to the earned value for performance measurement. Control accounts are placed at selected management points in the WBS. Each control account may include one or more work package, but each of the work packages should be associated with only one control account. A control account may include one or more planning package. A planning package is a work breakdown structure component below the control account with known work content but without detailed scheduled activities. Okay, in WBS Dictionary, the WBS Dictionary is a document that provides detailed deliverable, activity, and scheduling information about each component in the WBS. The WBS Dictionary is a document that supports the WBS. Information in the WBS Dictionary may include, but is not limited to, code of account identifier, description of work, assumptions and constraints, responsible organization, schedule, milestones, associated schedule activities, resources required, cost estimates, quality requirements, acceptance criteria, technical references, and agreement information. Okay. Lastly is project document updates. Okay, what is project document updates in outputs of Create Wbs? Project documents that may be updated include but are not limited to requirements documentation, which may need to be updated to include approved changes. If approved change requests result from the Create Wbs process, then the requirements documentation may need to be updated to include approved changes. Okay, that's it for Create Wbs.
Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Fasya Atiqah Binti Asri. My matric ID is I19103613. So today I would like to present about validate scope and control scope. Okay, so this is the slide, validate scope. Validate scope is the process of formalizing acceptance of the complete project deliverables. It means the key benefit of this process is that it brings objectivity to the acceptance process and increases the chance to final product, service or result acceptance by validating each deliverables. In validate scope, it has three: input, tools and techniques, and outputs. In inputs, we have project management plans, requirement documentation, requirement traceability metrics, verified deliverables, and work performance data. For tools and techniques, it has two: inspection and group decision-making techniques. Lastly, for outputs, it has accepted deliverables, change requests, work performance information, and project document updates. Okay, we move to the next slide, which is validate scope for inputs. It has project management plan, require documentation, work performance data, verified deliverables, and lastly, requirement traceability matrix. Alright, we move to the first one, which is project management plan. It contains the scope management plan and the scope baseline, which is specifies how formal acceptance of the complete project deliverable will be obtained. Alright, we move to the second one, which is requirement documentation. It means that lists all the project, product, and other types of requirement for the project and product along with their acceptance criteria. Alright, for the third one is requirement traceability metric. It means that links requirement to their origin and tracks them throughout the project life cycle. And for the fourth is verified deliverables. Project deliverables that are complete and checked for correctness throughout the control quality process. And the last one is work performance data. It means that can include the degree of compliance with requirement, member of non-conformities, security of the non-conformities, or the number of validation cycle performance in a period time. Alright, we move to the next slide, which is validate scope, tools, and techniques. It has two, which is inspection and group decision making techniques. Alright, for inspection, it includes activities such as measuring, examining, and validating to determine whether work and deliverables meet requirement and product acceptance criteria. Alright, we move to the next, which is group decision making techniques. These techniques are used to reach a conclusion when the validation is performed by the project team in some application ahead. These different terms have unique and specific meanings. Alright, we move to the next slide, which is validate scope for outputs. It has four, which is accepted deliverables, change requests, and work performance information, and lastly is project document updates. Okay, firstly, for accepted deliverables, it means that deliverables that meet the acceptance criteria are formally signed off and approved by the customer or sponsor. It formal documentation received from the customer or sponsor acknowledging formal stakeholder acceptance of the project deliverables is forwarded to the closed project process. Alright, next one, change requests. The complete deliverables that have not been formally accepted are documented along with the reason for non-acceptance of those deliverables. Those deliverables may require a change request for defect repair. Alright, so we move to the next one, which is work performance information. It includes information about project progress, such as which deliverables have started, their progress, which deliverables have finished, or which have been accepted. This information is documented and communicated to the stakeholder. Alright, we move to the last one, which is project document updates. Project documents that may be updated as a result of the validate scope process include any document that define the product or report status on product completion. It means that verified project document may require approval from the customer or sponsor in the form of signature or sign off. So we go through the next slide, which is control scope. Control scope is a process of monitoring the status of the project and product scope and managing changes to the scope baseline. It means that the key benefit of this process is allow to scope baseline to be maintained throughout the project. Alright, so for control scope, it has inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. For input, it has project management plan, required documentation, requirement traceability matrix, work performance data, and organizational process asset. For tools and techniques, it is variance analysis. For output, it has work performance information, change request, project management plan, and project document updates, and lastly is organizational process asset updates. Okay, so we move to the next slide, which is control scope inputs. It has 5 things. which is project management plan, requirement documentation, requirement traceability matrix, work performance data, and organizational process assets. For project management plan, it has 5 things, which is scope baseline, scope management plan, change management plan, configuration management plan, and lastly requirement management plan. Alright, for scope baseline, it is compared to actual result to determine if a change, corrective action, or preventive action is necessary. So for the scope management plan, it means that section from the scope management plan describe how the project scope will be monitored and controlled. So for the third one is change management plan. It defines the process for managing change or the project. Alright, so we move to the next slide, which is requirement documentation. Requirement should be ambiguous, which is measurable and traceable, traceable, complete, consistent, and acceptable to key stakeholders. Alright, for requirement traceability matrix, it helps to detect the impact of any change from the scope baseline on the project objectivities. Alright. For the work performance data, it means that can include the number of change requests received, the number of requests accepted, or the number of deliverables complete. Alright, for organizational process asset that can influence the control scope, process include but not limited such as existing formal and informal scope, control related policies, and procedural guideline. After that, it monitoring and reporting methods and templates to be used. Alright, so we move to the next slide, which is control scope for tools and techniques. It is variance analysis. Techniques for determining the cause and degree of difference between the baseline and actual performance. Alright, for control scope for outputs. Alright, we move to the next one, which is control scope for outputs. It has 5 things, which is work performance information, change requests, project management plan updates, project document updates, and organizational process asset update. Alright, for the first one, which is work performance information. It means that produce includes correlated and contextualized information on how the project scope is performing compared to the scope baseline. For the next one, which is change request to the scope, baseline, or other components of the project management plan. Alright, for the third one, which is project management plan updates, it has 2, which is scope baseline update and other baseline updates. For the fourth one is project document updates. It has also 2, requirement documentation, requirement traceability matrix. And for the last one, which is organizational process asset update. Alright, it cause of variance, corrective action chosen, and the reason. And the last one is other type of lesson learned from the project scope control. Alright, we move to the next slide, which is conclusion. In my conclusion, project scope management includes the process required to ensure that the project includes all the work required and only the work required to complete the project successfully. Managing the project scope is primarily concerned with defining and controlling what is and is not included in the project. So this is our reference. We do refer through the module that Madam Jaja gave and surf into Google. Alright, so that's all from us. Let us know if you guys have any question, and thank you. Bye.